This is the critical skill that you have to develop. And you know I'm going to say this. You expected that this whole session was going to be about this anyway. Is you need to learn how to say no to people. And it's a lot tougher than it sounds when you're the new kid on the block. Talk to colleagues in the department. Talk to your faculty association and your teaching and learning center. Ask them how much service is required to meet your service component. As most of you are aware, there's 3 components to academic job. That you will be gauged on all 3 for your tenure and for your promotion to associate professor. And that's research productivity, teaching, and service. Now there's a lot of different ways it goes. Often they'll say it's sort of 45, 45, and 10, research, teaching, service. Different institutions will give different lip service to it. But the service piece is not a big piece, but when you come to apply for tenure, it's important. But what's important about your service is which committees you served on, not necessarily how many. There will be Senate committees across, university-wide committees will have bigger value. Find the committees that are really high profile but never meet. Some people are really good at that. People can often tell you, well, it's really important to be on the academic changes to the blah blah and the blah blah committee, and that's a subcommittee of Senate. Would you like to be our departmental rep? And you say, well, how often does it meet? And if they say it's a really busy task force, they're meeting right now about 3 times a week for 2 hours, you say, let me think about that one. Or if they say, well, it's a really high-level committee, but it's only a tribunal if all other things fail and we're trying to do this, so it's convened when necessary. And you say, how often does it convene? And they say, well, it's convened twice in the last 3 years. You say, I'm in. And do committee work that you're interested in. I mean, you may have a student success committee within your own department that helps different learning styles. If that's your thing, then join it. But be thoughtful. You can say no for your first year to everything, and I would recommend that you do, unless it's something that you really passionately want to be involved in, that you think the opportunity won't come up again. You will be approached almost immediately by your chair, by your colleagues, with a whole number of committees. Try to stay away from saying yes, yes, yes. The other thing that's really sad is when you say yes to a couple of them because you feel like you should, because you're new, and then all of a sudden something you really do have an interest in and think you can make a difference in comes along. And that's when you tend to get overcommitted, which is the same as overcommitted. It just has an extra E, but it means the same thing. Because you really have a passion for this, but you've accepted these couple. And kicking around with your colleagues and asking them which committees have more profile for things like your tenure dossier is worth it. Don't feel that you're being mercenary when you do that. Your time is so valuable right now. Everybody's going to be asking for it. Your students are going to ask you for a million things. Be careful with your students if they're asking you for things that take up a lot more of your time. If they want to defer writing their exam because they have a ski trip planned, that's up to you. You'll have a tremendous amount of control. It'll freak you out how much control you have over what goes on in your classroom. But remember, if you have to develop an entire new exam for that student because they're writing it late, that may be more of your time than you can afford. So you may need to think about yourself and your mental health when you're saying yes or no. Your chair will ask you for a million things because you're the new guy and everybody else has already turned her down. Your dean will ask for a few things. Perk your ears up when your dean summons you because it's generally a good thing or not, depending on what it's about. But if you are asked by the faculty to do something and it is because you've got some level of expertise, that may be something worth looking at. Colleagues, your friends and family need to understand what a critical year your first year is for you. They need to understand you're not going to have as much time for them as you usually do. You're going to be geeked in. They're all expecting you to be free now that you've just defended your dissertation. You've been ignoring them for years. And so your children have gone from elementary school to high school and you haven't really noticed. But you're out and now everybody wants you back. And that's a really tough thing to balance because this is a busy year. It's why if you're not married, seek out someone and you intend to get married, which is totally your choice, or have a life partner, seek out someone in academia if possible. This is good and bad. But the good part is people understand and you can ignore each other for days on end and still feel like you're being collegial. Because it's tough. It's really tough to be married to or living with an academic. If you have a really intense day job in business that's over when you walk out the door, and you walk home and you're stressed and you're now it's over and you walk in and there's the night and there's your spouse marking papers till midnight or writing a thing. So Universities are more and more encouraging hiring couples to teach, and I'm sure you've all seen in your different academic units. People always think, gee, is that nepotism? Or most universities actually have even policies. We're trying to change the name here. There's a horrible term called the trailing spouse policy. But that's what it is. And what it means is I really want you in my academic department, and you are with somebody who is in another academic field, and you don't want to move until they move, so now we look for a job for them. It's not always two academics. It could be somebody in a business type job or in the business office or something else. But it's a trailing spouse policy. And what we want to hire at universities, we want to hire and keep good young researchers long term and young teachers long term. We don't want people to come for a couple of years and then leave. And if you hire two people with two academic positions, it's hard for them to leave. So it really does make sense for the university to want to keep the good, productive academic couple, because it's a good deal for them, because they've both got jobs in the same place. So, and I'm not suggesting that you toss out whoever your current partner is now because they don't meet this qualification. But it's one thing to think about. Just a little sort of to think about in closing. One of the hardest things for new professors, especially if you're new and young and haven't been out teaching for a bunch of years and then went back to do your PhD or whatever, is deciding where your relationship with your students lands. Some of you, I guarantee you, are going to look like them. Even your undergrads. I had a new professor come up to me one day and say that. How do I deal with my students? Because I look like them. I look the same age as them. And should I get them to call me doctor? Or, how can I assert myself? And it was funny after she left, because I didn't really have the heart to tell her. She didn't really look as young as she thought as her undergrad students. She did look as young as her graduate students. But you do have an issue with exerting authority if you look particularly young. So you may want to think about your dress, you want to think about your demeanor a little bit. Many of your students will be surprised at your youth, but they love it. We have undergrad students here. Do students love it when they walk in and see a really young professor in the front of the room? It's like, yes, there's a chance here that this is going to be fun. So you're starting in a good place when you look young. But if you've been TAing for a number of years, you may have had kind of different relationships with your students as a TA off and on. You need to draw a very definitive line, especially if you look young, because you need to garner their respect early on so that they're not pushing you around. Often we say this is more of an issue with female young professors. I'm not so sure that's the case, because I've worked with a number of young male professors as well. And if you're particularly young, and we don't have time for this today, but you need to think about, you could have a whole bunch of students developing pretty serious crushes on you. I know that sounds like, whoa, not me. But it can make your life interesting at best. So you want to have that distance developed right away. One of the real simple questions people want to know, what do my students call me? Most profs, and you know this, call themselves by their first names to their students, but all don't. All don't. If you want to be Dr. Miles when you walk in there because you think that you're going to look like one of your students or that they're not going to have, you want to say, most students will call you doctor or professor, especially first year students, because they've been calling their high school teachers Miss and Mrs. and Mr. So I've had a lot of students over the years that third year psychology, I usually teach third year psych, and they'll email me and say, hi, Dr. Miles, can I have blah, 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 or what? And I'll answer them back and I'll sign it Carol. And it'll often take 6 months for them to kind of mail back and say, hi, Carol. They don't. They still come back and say, thanks, Dr. Miles. Most of them are more comfortable, unless you kind of look them right in the eye and say, please call me. It still feels uncomfortable for them. You're the one who's got to get to the comfort place with your doctor, more than them. You want to write your name on the board. If you want them to call you doctor for a while, write, my name is Dr. Carol Miles. Nice to meet you. Here's my office. Just make that clear. Put it on your course outline. And then as you get a little bit of confidence and get to know them, your graduate students maybe call you by your first name, but your undergrads don't. That's your call.